Welcome to the Gentleman Project podcast. We just celebrated the Thanksgiving holiday. It's a busy time for all of us and one that we value, much like you and your family. We have spent more time with our families over the holiday and hope that you have as well, and hope that you'll enjoy an encore presentation of one of our favorite guests, Mr. Chester Elton, who teaches about the power and the impact of gratitude and the impact that it has on our lives as we live lives of Thanksgiving. We are also thankful for you, our listeners, and those who've helped make the podcast successful this year. Our many thanks and gratitude to you and your contributions, and thank you to all of you who are out there every day striving to make the world a better place by trying to be ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the podcast this morning. This is Kirk Chug.
And I'm Corey Moore.
We have Chester Elton on the program today. Chester was introduced to us by Curtis Bennett, who was on the program a couple of weeks ago, and this is what he said about Chester. He said, Chester is a man with a heart as big as Texas, energy that could power the sun, and goodness right down to his DNA from the beginning of time. And we thought, who is this guy? So we immediately reached out to Chester. Chester is the apostle of appreciation, and we're going to let him actually describe what that is and what that means. And Corey has got some more information on Chester to bring you up to speed with who you're listening to today.
Yeah, before we let Chester talk, who's the guest of honor, I'll tell you a little bit about Chester. He's the co-founder of Find Mojo, and he's the author of multiple award-winning New York Times, US Today, and #1 Wall Street Journal bestsellers, including All In, The Carrot Principle, which is a great one, Leading with Gratitude, and Anxiety at Work. And his books have been published in 30 languages and have sold more than 1.5 million copies. Chester, thanks for being with us.
Well, that's quite the introduction. Glad to be here.
So, Chester, this morning you're joining us from your home. Where's home for you?
I live in beautiful downtown Summit, New Jersey. We're just across the river from New York City.
That's fantastic. I think that most of the people that listen to the podcast on a regular basis know that we have had a lot of in-studio guests join us, and you are our first remote guest. And we love that you've taken the time to talk with us today and scheduled so quickly to be on the podcast. We're very appreciative of that. So, Chester, tell us a little bit about your background as it relates to business and fatherhood.
Well, as far as business goes, I've been in business with my co-author, Adrian Gostick, independently for about 10 years. Before that, we spent 11 years together in a bigger company writing our Carrot books. You mentioned The Carrot Principle, one of our favorites. And so it's been an interesting journey. I never thought that I would be an entrepreneur, that I would be in my own company. I always worked for bigger companies, was very safe there. Went through an interesting transformation in partnering with Adrian. We started writing books. We started to speak. We started to develop training. And our focus really is on creating these really great cultures where people can come and give their best. They're excited to come to work. They're excited to bring that goodness back to their families. And so that's been a really interesting journey. You mentioned our book, Anxiety at Work, comes out on May 4th. This year. We love that. May the 4th be with you. It's a great day to launch a book. And it's our 14th book together. So who would ever thunk it? And I will tell you on a personal side, for those of you that may be listening to this that went to high school with me and were in my English classes, you've probably scratching your head that Chester's a best-selling author. I find that hard to believe. It's because Adrian is the brilliant writer. It's a collaboration. Adrian is the writer.
You're the brainchild behind the writing.
Yeah, I will take credit. It was my idea to write the first book. Other than that, it's all Adrian. The fatherhood track is really an interesting one, and why I was really anxious to talk with you today about that. You know, I grew up in a ridiculously happy household. I was born in Edmonton, Alberta, grew up in Vancouver, Canada, youngest of 5 boys. My parents were married for 65 years, a ridiculously happy household. You know, my mom and dad's story is one of the great romance stories of all time. And having grown up with that, fatherhood was just important. Family was really important. I'll tell you my favorite story about my mom and dad is as I got older, I'd be sitting with my dad wherever we were. We were in church, we were at a concert, whatever. And my mother would walk by and he would say this every time. He'd say, Chess, look at your mom. Isn't she beautiful? Isn't she so smart? Isn't she so talented? Aren't we lucky? And
I love that.
When you grow up with that, she's beautiful, she's smart, she's talented, and we're lucky to be around her. That's, what I try to do. My brothers often are asked, and we are asked, what was the greatest lesson that your father taught you? And my brother Kim summed it up. He said, he taught us how to love our wives.
Wow. That's an incredible example for you to have had growing up. How's that impacted you as a husband, and then you as a father teaching that to the next generation?
Well, I think it's the ripple effect. That's what I grew up with. That's all I knew. I never saw my parents raise their voices to each other. Maybe they did. I just wasn't around to see it. And I've never raised my voice to my wife. We disagree on things. We don't fight. We talk things through, and that's the example I'm trying to set for my children. I've got 3 kids that are married, and hopefully that's rippling through to their relationships as well.
That's great. Have they ever talked to you about that?
Yeah, my oldest daughter is married, very happily married, and my youngest son is recently married. They're expecting their first child. I will tell you, we've had a tough situation. My oldest son is actually going through a divorce now, and that's been hard. And sometimes, you've got to accept the fact that sometimes it doesn't work. Your goal is that you want it to work, and you do everything to make it work. And sometimes it just doesn't. I'm sure you've had friends that have started out and the relationships were great and things were going well, and something happened and it got sideways. And staying in those relationships where it doesn't work isn't fair to either of you either. It's always great to talk about the unicorns and rainbows,
Right. And everything's not always picture perfect.
Exactly. And I think as you go through those tough times, you learn a lot of lessons that hopefully you take forward and you make the best of it and you soldier on.
So Chester, obviously a lot of people in the world are going through divorce or have been through divorce. And it sounds like one of your children are in the midst of it. But is there any advice that you would give related to either being a parent, helping a child go through that, or being the person that's going through the divorce? Anything that comes to mind related to that?
Yeah, I've been very proud of my son, the way he's handled it. He's actually moved in with us in the interim, and he's got 2 just adorable little kids. They're just beyond delightful, and we get him, 3.5 days a week. He never, ever says anything disparaging about their mom. And I think that's really, really important. And whenever the kids will say, well, mom was, because little kids, if they don't get chocolate for every meal, they're upset, right? And they'll say, mom wasn't being kind. And his comeback always is, your mother loves you very much. And I think that's really an important lesson, because if you introduce that kind of toxicity, now your kids are divided. And, so far, so good. Both of them know that their mom loves them unconditionally. Their dad loves them unconditionally. And there's never this pitting one against another.
Sounds like you raised a gentleman.
He is. I'm very proud of Carter. And that's the perfect, if you put a label on somebody, Carter being a gentleman, it fits.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Chester, tell us a little bit about the moniker that you use, the Apostle of Appreciation. And because I have found so much power in gratitude. We hear it all the time that, a life lived in gratitude is a life well lived. And you have a different mindset about the way you go about your day, the way you treat other people, all of that. I'm assuming that you've done a lot of research and a lot of study on that. If you have called yourself the Apostle of Appreciation, give us some tidbits of how we can use appreciation, gratitude, and that attitude towards our children and our families as it relates to fatherhood and even outside of the home.
Yeah. Well, I actually didn't give myself that moniker. It's a great story, actually.
We'd love to hear it.
Yeah. Adrian and I both grew up in Canada. And so, as we started to write books and, you get reviewed by various magazines and stuff. And we were collecting fun nicknames. We did some presentations on recognition and gratitude in Germany. And they called us the Deacons of Dankeschön, which was kind of fun.
Yeah.
The ministers of motivation, the high priests of praise. A really cute one was the Dalai Lamas of workplace traumas. We thought that was very clever. And then the Toronto Globe and Mail. So total props for me and Adrian, having grown up in Canada. It's Canada's largest newspaper. They reviewed the carrot principle, and they said, without question, Adrian Gostick and Chester Elton are the apostles of appreciation. And I always think it's better when somebody else gives you the moniker.
For sure, yeah.
It's better to have somebody else call you the greatest of all time instead of you reminding people that you're the greatest of all time. And so we took it. Our latest book, actually, Leading with Gratitude, we think is basically the carrot principle 2.0, and I'll get into how that relates to families and kids here in just a second. So we've picked up another moniker, which is the Gurus of Gratitude, which is total props if you're presenting in India, by the way. So how does that relate to families and whatnot? Well, Adrian and I have become experts in workplace culture. In fact, it's really fun. We make these lists, global gurus and, the 200 leaders to follow this year and so on. And what was not lost on us is in building a great culture at work and the principles that you do around communication and valuing people and celebrating, small wins and so on, were absolutely applicable to your personal life. One of our favorite data points, and by the way, we have a database of over 1 million engagement surveys and another, 90,000 people that have taken our motivators assessment. Our favorite data point is that people that are happy and motivated at work are 150% more likely to be happy and motivated in their personal lives. And why is that? Well, if you leave your job happy, you're more likely to share that happiness with your family. If you leave your job miserable, you're also more likely to share that misery with your family until they can't stand it anymore. And then, you go out back and kick the cat. My point is that those principles of communication, of vulnerability, of being honest, of appreciating, what's going right and not always pointing out just what's going wrong. Those are wonderful principles in your personal life. Now, our latest book, Leading with Gratitude, we were able to interview just some amazing business leaders, Alan Mulally that saved the Ford Motor Company in the last recession, and Hubert Joly that turned around Best Buy, and on, Ken Chenault that built up American Express, Indira Nooyi that, just retired from Pepsi. What we loved is these principles of leading with gratitude. Every one of them took it home. And that was so affirming. So the last section of the book, we said, well, how do you lead a grateful life? And we said, share some of the things you do with your families. And this was one wonderful practice. A friend of ours in New York runs this digital agency. And he said, we would try to eat dinner together as often as we could. This is, pre-COVID. And he said the conversations were never very engaging, right? He said we'd say, how was school? Say, fine.
Good.
Well, yeah. What did you learn? Nothing. Exactly. You've had the conversation. Yeah. So he said, we're going to change it up. And at dinner, you've got to answer 3 questions. So be prepared. First question is, what's the best part of your day? What was the best part of your day? Second question, who are you grateful for that's not at the table? And the third question is, who are you grateful for who's at the table who hasn't been thanked yet? And he said, at first they were like, Dad, you're always doing stuff like this. Why do we have to do these crazy things? And said, we started to do it. It became a ritual. It became part of our, dinner tradition. And he says, it changed everything. The feeling around the table, the engagement. You got to brag about your day, talk about a friend, and then brag on somebody in the family. Simple things like that, I think, are wonderful family traditions. And we've adopted that into our family. It's been lovely.
That's fantastic. We were just having a conversation before the podcast, recording Corey and I, about something that Curtis said about making breakfast for his family. And that was one of the traditions that he did. He'd get up every morning and create a breakfast and send his kids off with the best chance they could to have a positive, successful day. And Corey was just telling me about how cool that's been because he's adopted that. And it's kind of what we're trying to do is share some good ideas here.
Yeah. When we started the Gentleman Project some time ago, one of the things I loved about it was I had all these thoughts in my mind, right? All these things that I had learned over time reading books and learned from other friends. And I had all these internal principles that I wanted to pass to my kids. And I didn't want to miss any. And so I really loved the idea of continually purposefully teaching them kind of one principle at a time, right? So if you look at, certainly we all have 1,000 of those things in our mind, but is there any, Chester, that you're like, oh man, if I had to pick a couple things, 3 or 4 things that I really want to give to my children and that they internalize, what would those be for you?
Yeah, a great question, and it's something my dad passed down to me, which isn't surprising, right? Let me share it with you in a quick little story. 5 boys in our family, right? Lunatics. You can imagine my poor mother. We broke everything, right? And we were a tennis family. We played a lot of tennis, and so being the youngest, as all the brothers left home, it was my dad and I, and we had a great Saturday ritual. We would go play tennis Saturday morning. Then we'd go to McDonald's and get a McMuffin. It was our breakfast thing. And then often my dad would love to go to the Army and Navy. Now, the Army and Navy just recently closed, actually. It was open for 103 years in Vancouver. And it was located in a bit of a sketchy part of town called Gastown. Anyway, so I'll never forget one beautiful, if you've been to Vancouver, it's a spectacularly beautiful city. And we'd play tennis. We'd had our McMuffin. We were heading over to Army and Navy. And we had to walk by Pigeon Park, where the homeless people kind of hung out. And as we were getting ready to cross the street, a homeless lady came across the street with everything she owned in a brown paper sack. Well, it split open and spilled on the sidewalk. Now, in those situations, what do? You break eye contact, you give them a wide berth, you keep going, nothing to see here, right? And that's what everybody did, except for my dad. And this is why it was such a poignant moment for me. He immediately went up to her. He knelt down. He helped her gather up her stuff. He said something that made her laugh. I'll never forget that. That was my dad. And he ushered her safely into the park. Well, when he came back, and I'm watching all this, and I'm a teenager, right? And of course, knowing everything, I said to my dad, I said, Dad, you probably shouldn't touch those people. They're not clean. And he looked at me and he paused and he said something I've never forgotten. He said, you know what, Chess? You be good to everybody. Everybody's having a tough day. And I never forgot that. You be good to everybody. Everybody's having a tough day. One of the great things my dad taught me, and I hope that I've passed on to my kids, is everybody mattered to my dad. Whether you were parking his car or bagging his groceries, or you were a captain of industry, he made everybody around him feel great. Everybody had a story. Everybody's story was important. And he would say, listen, you don't, and we say this all the time. We say, look, you come to work and people show up to work with and for you don't know what they came from. If they've had trouble with a kid or, can't get them out of bed or, problems with drugs, whatever it might be. Here's what you do know is the time they spend with you can be the best time of their day, that they believe what they do matters, that they made a difference. And when they made a difference, you noticed it and you thanked them for it. Be good to everybody. Everybody is having a tough day. And boy, I think when you approach people like that, you're a lot more empathetic. You're a lot more caring. You're assuming more positive intent. And if there's one lesson I would love for my kids to learn from me that I learned from my dad, it's that.
That is a fantastic lesson. One that I've talked to my kids about often, right? When someone's, rude to you at a restaurant or someone has road rage or you name it, right? It's always good to remember who knows what happened in the day. They could have got the worst news they've had in their life that day. So I love that. I love that story. Thank you for sharing that.
One other cute one, and it's funny you mentioned that. Adrian and I write everywhere, and on LinkedIn, I've got this fun gratitude journal. It's just a monthly newsletter. And it's actually, I'm surprised how popular it's become. We have like almost 50,000 subscribers. And so it's just once a month. It's kind of musings, and we put little links and stuff in there. And I wrote this one in November, and to be grateful for hard times. As we're going through all this stuff and for the refiner's fire and what did you learn and don't be a victim. And I was really quite proud of myself. Now, full disclosure, I wrote it up Adrian edited it, made it much better than it was when I wrote it. And we posted it. And the feedback was great. It was like, oh, I love this. I'm going to print this out and put it on my bathroom mirror. Right in the middle, to your point, Corey, a guy writes this little one sentence. He goes, "You're an idiot." right in the middle. And I'm thinking, oh, well, that was a little unexpected. And to your point, I thought, well, I'm going to take a beat. I'm going to assume positive intent. This guy's probably having the worst day ever. And the last thing he needed was for me to tell him, no, you should be grateful for all this misery, right? So channeling my inner, adult Elton, my dad, I said, well, what can I do about this? So I thought about it for a second and I responded. I thought I should respond. And I said, well, thank you. P.S. My children would agree.
And you made him laugh like your dad would have.
I'm hoping that he got that and it just lightened his day and thought, whatever you're going through, buddy, hopefully this gave you a bit of a chuckle. Let's move on. Right.
So tell the listeners how they might subscribe to that newsletter.
Yeah, just go on LinkedIn and follow me, and it'll show up. And just click subscribe. It's been a great little project. It wasn't anything that I was doing other than I thought, you know what, a little gratitude journal to help other people lighten their day once a month. What could it hurt?
Chester, tell us a little bit more about the power that gratitude plays in creating a positive place to work and a positive place at home.
Yeah, I mean, the principles are exactly the same. We've done a lot of research around this, and it's really interesting. We talk about what is the ratio of positive to negative in a positive workplace. Well, the ratio is exactly the same in a positive relationship, right? And if I were to ask you, what would be your guess? Positive to negative. You make one negative comment. How many positive comments do you need to offset that? What would be your guess, Kirk?
I've heard my whole life 1 to 10.
Yeah. And actually, if you get a 1-star review on Amazon, it takes 20 5-star reviews to negate that. It's actually 5.6, so you could round it up to 6. So it's not quite 10, although it's really interesting if you were to monitor your interactions at work, particularly if you're a supervisor, a manager, a leader. It's really interesting. Often as leaders, to justify our titles and our responsibilities, we're very quick to point out what's going wrong. We're problem solvers. So we're looking for problems, right? As opposed to really appreciating the hundreds of great things that happen every day that keep the doors open. Well, it's the same in a relationship, right? What is your relationship with your kids? And we see this, the classic example is your son or daughter brings home their report card and they've got 10 courses and they've got 9 A's and 1 C+. What's the first thing we say?
What happened there?
Yeah. A C+ in phys ed? How is that possible? And then we jump right to the negative instead of saying 9 out of 10. Are you kidding? That's world class. And so it was a really great reminder for us, not only in the workplace, but in our personal relationships. Now, really interesting. The University of Washington did this amazing study with newlyweds. You've maybe heard of this. They put them in a room for 15 minutes and had them do a puzzle together. Have you heard of this study?
I haven't, no.
It's amazing. So for 15 minutes, they do a puzzle and they recorded the positive to negative ratio, the interaction. And if the ratio was 1 to 1, they could predict with 93%, I think it's 94% accuracy, within 3 years, they'd be divorced. If you're positive negative ratio, 94% you'd be divorced. If it was around 5 to 1, they would continue to be happily married. And it was really interesting to watch. It was like, oh, you found the corner piece. That's so great. Oh, you're so good about that spatial relationship. Oh man, you're doing so well. Those kinds of little encouraging things instead of, well, why would you put that there? Obviously, that doesn't go there. What do you mean you can't find the corner? How tough is it to find the corner piece? And we see this in friends and neighbors where you kind of go, gosh, give each other a little grace. Give each other a little break. It's a puzzle. It's this isn't the cure for COVID, right?
Yeah. Oh, that's great. I love that. I might have my daughter and her future potential husband do a puzzle together.
Well, I'm definitely going to.
Yeah.
One of the things I've loved is sharing these podcasts with my kids. And I can already tell you, Chester, that this is going to be definitely one that they listen to with me already, because I think some of the things you've taught us and talked about are very, very important. So do you have any major worries as a father? Are there things that you say, man, I'm really worried about this, or these are the things that I do worry about?
Yeah, I worry about my kids all the time. And it's interesting. My dad used to say, don't tell me not to worry, because 99% of the things I worry about never happen. And I'm convinced it's because I was worried about them.
That was what fixed it.
Yeah, I do. I worry that, my kids will find meaningful work, that they'll be gentlemen and gentlewomen, that they'll live lives of service. I've developed a mantra in the morning, and I share it with my kids because, it's important to start your day, I think, in a mindset of gratitude. And when my feet touch the ground, I repeat over myself as often as I need to convince myself that it's going to be a good day, that, to be kind, to be grateful, and to be of service. One of my heroes is Frances Hesselbein. And I don't know if you know the story of Frances Hesselbein, but she's 106 years old and still kicking. She was the one that saved the Girl Scouts of America. She said, to serve is to live. And I think no truer words were spoken, that when you are involved in service to others, it's really hard to be worried and to be anxious. In our work on gratitude, we said, it's impossible to be in a state of gratitude and a state of anxiety at the same time. So if you have a choice, choose gratitude. Don't choose anxiety. And so, yeah, I do. I worry about my kids, and I reflect on, did I do enough as a father to instill those good principles in them? Will they be able to reflect back and ask themselves, well, what would my dad have said? What would my dad have done? And will that be a positive influence? So,
yeah, I think if they talk about you like you have your father, that's a success, because it sounds like you guys had a good relationship. He taught you a lot. I certainly commonly refer to what my dad taught me and things that he, instilled in me. And I talk to my kids about those all the time.
Yeah, there's not a day goes by I don't reflect on my dad. I'll tell you another thing I think that's really important as fathers and as gentlemen to teach our kids. And I came to this a little late, and so I've been sharing it with my kids as much as I can, is your inner voice. It's always interesting to me that sometimes we will say things to ourselves that we would never say to anyone else. That we can be somewhat cruel to ourselves. Wow, how could you be so stupid? I can't believe you said that. Boy, sometimes you're just a knucklehead, Mm-hmm. And I had a really interesting conversation with a good friend of mine, Marshall Goldsmith, who's this ridiculous executive coach. He's become my mentor, my friend, and we're part of a leadership group that he founded called the MG 100. And I was sharing this with him in one of our group settings, and he said, whoa, stop a minute. He says, Chester, wait a minute. He says, you talk about your dad all the time. I said, yeah. He said, what would your dad think if he heard you say that you were mean to yourself? And it was really a moment for me. And I said, you know what? He would be disappointed. And he said, yeah, so don't disappoint your dad. Make your voice your best friend. And when you get those moments, say, I'm not going to talk to myself like that. I'm going to say, what would my best friend say to me? What would my dad say to me? And you know what he'd say? You know what? You tried hard. Didn't work. It's okay. It's okay. Move on. Be good to yourself. And I think particularly with COVID and particularly with, wellness and it's more appropriate as gentlemen for us to be more vulnerable and talk about things that maybe a generation or so ago we wouldn't, that it's really important that we teach our kids and our friends and neighbors, and particularly ourselves, to make that inner voice your best friend. It was really interesting. I sold Bibles door to door for 3 summers. It was like the best of times. It was the worst of times, right? And because it's such a hard job, and it was a wonderful company, Southwestern Books out of Nashville, Tennessee. I'll never forget. Good Canadian boy learning how to sell Bibles in the South. It was hilarious, and lessons that I take with me today. But the morning ritual was really important, and it was that positive self-talk. We had these different things that we would say to each other. We'd get together with a couple of other booksellers and have breakfast and build each other up. And one of my favorites, and I've remembered to this day, that was hilarious. It was Oni Kirk was one of leaders, and is African American, and very much a the revivalist kind of leader. He was always ministering to us and preaching to us. It was great. He'd get up and he'd say, when you get up there in the morning and that first thing, and you take that cold shower, like you'd always end your shower with 5 minutes of ice cold water. Don't ask me why. It's a horrible way to start your day, but it really got the blood flowing, right? You jump out of that shower and you look at yourself in that mirror. You know what I want you to say to yourself? You look at yourself and you say, "You handsome devil, don't you ever die." So there are days when I'm having a bit of a tough day getting going, and I'll turn the shower to cold and I'll jump out and I'll say, "Chester, you handsome devil, don't you ever die."
I think I'm going to do that tomorrow with my wife in the bathroom, just so she can witness, this. She's going to look at me like you have lost your mind. That's
you
great.
haven't listened to the podcast yet, honey?
So you mentioned a few minutes ago, some of the one of the mantras that you've used as a family. I love mantras because I feel like they're a way to internalize something you can say over and over with your kids. Are there some mantras in your family that you could share with us? Things that you typically will talk about as a family?
Yeah. We talk about faith, family, friends. That your faith is the bedrock. Family will always be there. And to your point, as you were talking about, to your daughter, to be a good friend, to have a lot of good friends, you've got to be a good friend. So faith, family, friends. We had one when my kids were little that was pretty funny. It was about whining and quitting. I grew up, you just never quit. You might not win, you just never quit, And so I'd say to my kids, I go, what are the two things your dad hates the most? And they'd say, whiners and quitters. And I'd say, that's right. When's the only time you're allowed to quit? Is when we quit whining. So
they probably still remember that to this day, don't they?
Oh, well, yeah. I hope so. And then that, the one that my dad passed down is be good to everybody. Everybody's having a tough day. Just give people some grace.
So I've got a question that I kind of built the Gentleman Project on as I networked with people. Instead of talking about what I did for a living, I was more interested in practical ideas that I could implement at home with my kids, of how I can connect with them, because that's really where the Gentleman Project came from. Was I found an idea that worked in my home, and I would often find people had great ideas. They had no venue to share those great ideas of how they connected with their kids. So one of my favorite questions to ask guests who have been fathers or are currently in the midst of being a father, what are some things that you do right now or did in the past that connected you with your kids better than any other idea that you ever had?
Yeah, and it's old school, and yet I've really been pleased the impact it's had, and that is I write letters to my kids. We're members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and my boys served missions, and I made it a point to write them a letter every week. And what I was really pleased is we were cleaning stuff out as my kids got older and were moving away. They all kept that box of letters. That wasn't something they were willing to recycle. And my dad used to write me on my mission, not often. By the way, I went to southern Italy on my mission for 2 years. And I always joke with people that when you open that letter that tells you where you're going to spend the next 2 years of your life, and it says you have to spend the next 2 years of your life in southern Italy, that's when you know Jesus loves you. It was like the best 2 years of my life for 100,000 reasons. I love this idea of the handwritten note and the letter. It's a different conversation, and I text them, and we call and we Zoom and all that and FaceTime. But there's something about getting something in the mail that's the work of the hand. It's an uninterrupted conversation. You took the time, and when people read it, they've carved out the time to do just that. You're not, it's not a text that pops up when you're in the middle of a meeting or an email that you don't get to for a few days, and I think they're treasured. I've received letters back from my kids, and I put them in my journals, and they're precious to me. I think that's a practice that really is one that I would pass on to your listeners. The other one is a practice that my wife and I have, and whenever our kids are around, we include them. We end the day with a very simple ritual. We ask each other, what are your three? What are three things you're grateful for today? And they don't have to be big things. It can be we went on a walk. It can be the weather. It can be a note we got from the kids. And it's often more than three things that we're grateful for. And you know, the research shows that it just calms your mind at the end of the day. It puts yourself in a good state. You sleep better. You sleep deeper. And when our kids are around, we invite them in and we say, what are your three? And I think those two rituals are ones that I hope last, you know, through the generations, because I love that. The handwritten note and what are your three?
Fantastic rituals. Thanks for sharing those. How about we sometimes need to get a little vulnerable on these podcasts, because we all like to talk about the things that we've done well and that have worked. But I think we learn a lot more sometimes from the things that were hard. Right. So is there some things that you think of, you say, you know, what's the hardest thing you went through as a father and how did you overcome it?
Everybody has stuff, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. You know, I always like, oh, they're living a perfect life. I go, no, there's no way.
Yeah.
Nobody has a perfect life.
If they say that, they're lying.
That's right. You know, the Facebook life is such a sham, you know.
Yeah.
Oh, they're always happy. They're so good looking. They're so successful. Yeah, we've gone through some stuff with our kids. And the lessons I learned was that it's just really important to listen and listen very carefully. And I didn't do that well early on as a father, because, you know, my generation, it was, look, suck it up. You know, get out of bed. You know, get going. I remember one of our kids was having a tough time getting to school, and I'd come in, and I was pretty heavy-handed. I go, look, millions of kids are getting up and going to school today. Be one of those kids, you know.
That sounds just like me, quite frankly.
And we have a lot in common.
Darn it.
Yeah. What do you mean it hurts? Rub some dirt on it. Get back in the game, you know. Because I was a generation where if you got a concussion, that was a badge of honor. Some smelling salts, head right back in. And I wasn't careful. I wasn't listening. And we tend to project ourselves. Well, I did it, so you should be able to do it. No. And because I did it this way, this is the way you should do it. And you should just take all those emotions and bury them deep, you know, never admit weakness. And yeah, you're going to get an ulcer, but it'll be worth it. You know, this is stupid things that we tell ourselves. And that was a real learning experience for me, that we finally got to the point where we said, look, clearly this isn't working, and we're crushing this poor kid. And is that the legacy we want to leave? And I think, you know, you learned your hardest lessons from your hardest tests and your biggest mistakes. And boy, if, you know, to be able to go back in time, yeah, I'd be a lot more empathetic. I'd listen a lot more, and I'd be a lot more caring for those kids. And luckily, I married way above my station, and my wife was a lot better at that than I was. And it's a process. You know, I think the toughest thing for me to learn, and it's still a lesson that I'm learning, is to forgive yourself. You know, I think that's the toughest thing, because you look at the damage you've done, and it wasn't intentional. I mean, we don't set out to beat up our kids, and yet there are times when we absolutely do. And I reflect on that probably too much, and don't give myself enough grace, and give my kids that same grace. You know, and so I think that's an ongoing thing. I love the mantra, you know, forgive yourself every day. You know, be forgiving of yourself and others every day, because something's going to happen.
Yeah, and I think asking forgiveness of the kids is also important, right? You know, Dad didn't do a great job here, but yeah, I still love you, and here's the forgiveness. For the listeners, you know, I think sometimes, and especially listen to this podcast, you hear all these wonderful things about fathers and about what they're doing right, and for all of us, it's hard. For all of us, it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back. But similar to what Chester said, even as a father, you've got to never give up. You've got to continue to walk towards, you know, your ideal, as Curtis Bennett would say. And I've seen that in my own life, as I haven't always been the greatest father, but I didn't give up. I continued to try. And I can tell you that today I'm a better father than I was last year. And my poor oldest daughter, she didn't get the same Corey as my other kids are going to get, right? Because I've improved, but I talked to her about that. So I appreciate you sharing them that. And I kind of felt like we should tell the listeners, if you're having a bad day, if you don't feel like you're doing a great job, everyone feels that way. And some days are better than others. And if you just hang in there over the long run, you can definitely improve of being a parent.
Yeah, I think those are really words of wisdom. Just get better. You're never going to get perfect. If you're getting a little better, that's great. And, the thing that I would want my kids to remember, when I'm, long gone, is that I loved them unconditionally and that I was always their biggest cheerleader. And if they just remember those two things, I'd count myself lucky.
Kids these days, they are dealing with more than we did growing up, quite frankly. They have the internet and they have social media and they have their phones and they have different television and access to anything that their mind can conceive. They can get their hands on it, right? And so, many of the parents today are dealing with things that they didn't experience in their youth. So talk to us a little bit about how you see the difference in today's children and the way we grew up.
Yeah, I think every generation it gets tougher. I really do. And for the very reason you talked about. I mean, we've got these supercomputers in our pockets, and you can find out anything, you can access anything, you can post anything in a matter of seconds. And I think as parents, it's really incumbent on us to create moments where kids are disconnected, where there's a tangible world. I'm a huge believer, and unfortunately with COVID for the last year, it hasn't been possible, that travel is a great educator. Go to a different country, learn a different language, eat weird food, go for a walk in the woods. One of the things we did 4 years ago that has just been a delight is we bought a little place in the upstate New York in the Adirondacks, spectacularly beautiful. And the Wi-Fi connection is horrible. It's great.
Great, isn't it?
It's great. Seriously, you take 2 steps outside the house, there's no Wi-Fi. There's no cell phone coverage. There's nothing. You have to literally listen to the birds and go for a walk in the woods and jump in the lake. And I've really tried to bring that to my kids. We travel. We go to different churches. We go to different countries. Give your kids as much of a diverse experience as you can. I honestly believe that if you start your day, though, and you say, look, I'm going to be kind, I'm going to be grateful, and I'm going to be of service, I think that goes a long way to breaking down a lot of barriers and removing a lot of stigmas around some of the things that are just dividing so many people today. And it's so unfortunate because the world really is more spectacular than we could have ever imagined as kids. Let's embrace that goodness and let's move forward.
Amen. So on that note, Chester, we ask all of our guests what they think it means to be a gentleman. And the variety of answers is quite fascinating. In your mind, what does it mean to be a gentleman?
Yeah. And again, this is from my dad, is just love your wife unconditionally. Love your children unconditionally, no matter what the situation is. And everybody has a story, and that story is important to them. Learn their story and honor that story. But if you love your wife unconditionally and you love your kids unconditionally, you can't help but be a gentleman.
Our appreciation goes out to you for taking the time to be with us today, to be on the podcast, and to share the story of your family, of your father. Sounds like an amazing man. And he's obviously left a legacy in you that's reaching a lot of people. And for that, we're grateful.
Well, thanks for having me on the show. We talk about leading with gratitude is a great way to build a company. I think it's an even better way to live. And I think our fathers that were gentlemen impact our lives for generations. The most wonderful thing anybody could ever say to me would be, wow, you really are your father's son.
Sounds like your father was a gentleman, and you are too. Thanks for being with us, Chester.
You bet. Thanks for the invitation. Call me again anytime. This was great.
Thank you, Chester. If you have any info, feedback that you'd like to pass on to us, please email us at info@thegentlemanproject.com. or find us on any social media platform, and you can send us a message. We love hearing from our listeners. We appreciate you spending the time with us today. I'm Kirk Chugg.
And I'm Corey Moore.
Thanks for joining us on the Gentleman Project Podcast.